Welcome back to the class, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about GAC Omicrons. More specifically, free-to-play GAC Omicrons. The reason why we use air quotes there is because technically every GAC Omicron is free to play if you just play for long enough or you have enough investment. But we really want to hone in on the ones that are super accessible, kind of independent of your level, and on top of that, the ones that are actually good and are, worth your resources. So let's go ahead and get into it. So we do, as always, when we talk about these type of videos, have a list of criteria. I want to show everyone that up front and a little bit of a review of what we just talked about. So number one, the Omicrons we want to look at, or that you want to apply, they have to be good. Like, they can't just be accessible. They can't be something you can get right out the gate. If they're not worth anything, they're not going to change any battles. They're not going to win you any more matches for you to move up on the ladder, then what's the point? So obviously they have to be good. One of the other criteria we're going to be using is no new characters, and there's a few reasons behind this. Typically because new characters are trying to pull in other characters that typically we don't have built up. We've seen this a lot recently. A lot of the lifters that are coming in, they're grabbing some of the older characters that really were never very good, and it just ends up making the whole team fairly inaccessible. A good example, this is Sana. She came in, she grabbed Stormtrooper Han. That's great, but now you have to gear up both of them, and Sana has a bunch of Kairos and is an accelerated. Similar can be seen with like T3 and Sortie, as well as, I guess, Clone Wars Chewbacca and Tarful. The list kind of goes on. No legends. I realize that, tens of thousands of people have unlocked Starkiller and applied Omicrons completely free to play. But again, when we're talking about what is the most accessible, what you can get really quickly that can instantly get you a lot of return, we're not going to be talking about legends. So Starkiller, Afra, Malgus, all amazing, just not going to make the list. And last but not least, long lasting. And that kind of goes to what we were talking about before as well with the good. We don't want to apply an Omicron that is only going to be around for the next 3 months or so. And luckily, they've been in the game for a really long time. We have a ton of information from players who have been out there, who've been testing things. We kind of have a good idea of what ends up being not only good in the beginning and mid game, but also what kind of carries on into the end. So with that being said, let's go ahead and just jump into it. So starting off here, we're actually going to be talking about Admiral Radice. So he is number 10, so he's last on the list, so take this with a grain of salt. But what Admiral Radice's Omicron does for his team, it's actually pretty cool. It adds 40% max protection. One of the reasons why this is good is because a lot of the things that beat Radice focus on max health damage, the most notable of which is Bad Batch. So when you increase your max protection, you're not just gaining overall more survivability, but you're changing your protection to health ratio and making it harder for exposes or just the max health damage through debuffs that Echo has to actually chew through your team. And at the start of the battle, all Rogue One allies gain Spark of the Rebellion for 3 turns. When it is dispelled, you also just gain this massive amount of buffs and protection up for 2 turns. This is pretty typically going to happen all throughout the battle. With the way that kits are being made now and teams are being built, there is almost always one mass dispel, or mass dispel from the enemy team on your team, where the fact that you're going to get all these right in a row, and you're actually going to have enough damage to be able to kill the enemy team without having to unlock Radice's ult at the very end, which will definitely do it. But if we wouldn't have any shot at doing it beforehand, that is really stinking nice. One of the other things about Admiral Radice that is cool, as of like right now, actually not right now, probably next week, he is about to be accelerated. In a week, all of his shards will be doubled, and then the rest of his team to be able to put together isn't going to be all that hard. You really just need to focus on getting Rogue One characters, and if you're wanting to at any point go after Profundity, you kind of get 3 really good Rogue One characters, well, best and kinda, right off the bat from that. And then I personally encourage people to go after K2 to finish out the team, but SRP's okay, Base is okay, you have a few different options there. But coming in 10th is going to be Admiral Radice. It does change the battle a little bit, and as well, you're kind of able to get him fairly easily. Next up is going to be Dash. So Dash is still really on the good side of things and is going to, kind of similar to Admiral Radice, is going to suffer on the accessible part. And the reason why is because everybody wants to get Dash because they either want to get Profundity or Starkiller or both. That's awesome. He's amazing. But one of the parts that really is kind of hard is the whole point of the Omicron is so that Vandor will constantly revive, and we'll get into that mechanic just a little bit. And Vandor, unfortunately, he's not required for anything. Like, he doesn't have a special mission. He's not a part of an assault battle. He's not needed for a legendary. There's no galactic legend. Not to say there won't be one in the future, but if we're going off of the information we have now, he's just not one that really promotes a lot of roster building where you can get these flow charts of one thing goes right into the next. So that's kind of where they're coming at 9th. But yeah, again, getting into what it does is actually very simple. If an ally loses prepared, they gain prepared. And again, the whole point of this, and honestly, if you don't have Vandor, do not apply Dash's Omicron. It's really not good. It does very, very little for the rest of the faction. But when we actually look at it, if Chewbacca is prepared, then Chewbacca is no longer prepared, so he would gain it back here, and he would do it when a scoundrel ally, or light-sized scoundrel ally, is defeated. He revives them at 60% health. The way that this works is actually really cool. If you, for example, take in someone with a really strong AoE on the other team, and you kill 4 members at the same time that aren't in Vandor, he will bring all 4 back. So it's instantaneous. You're not just getting a 1 revive, and then the preparedness kicking back in. It's back to back to back to back. So overall, pretty good, but the price of entry does end up being just slightly more expensive than we want it to be. Next up is going to be First Order TIE Pilot. Really stinking good. The only caveat is First Order. It's the only one that it really works with. He really takes any team that isn't like an SLKR just to the next level. The amount of things that adds in here, I have found, quite honestly, all of these to be really helpful. The one gripe that I have is in 5v5, at least towards the end of the game, mid-game and beginning game is probably very good, but end game, this doesn't really change a lot of the counters. Hux and crew don't have like this huge plethora of things that they just suddenly get to beat when you add this. It is really nice for 3s, especially in the very end, because you can use Hux lead with Lobster. It is a ton of damage, and you can just delete characters. Part of the reason for that is they get an extra 50% critical damage, 100 speed, a bunch of extra health, and then one thing that I think makes the biggest difference that people don't really talk about, whenever First Order TIE Pilot gains Foresight, all allies gain Foresight for 2 turns. So not only are you getting to pack a bigger punch with everything that you have going out and you're taking more turns, but you actually have some survivability that doesn't just kind of removes the equation of you having to be hit. So First Order TIE Pilot, very good. Does have the caveat that you need First Order, and he's not super relevant in the very end game. Next up is going to be Asajj, and Asajj, again, similar to First Order TIE Pilot. Actually, she kind of has a come around with her. She is really good in the beginning and mid game, and one of the reasons why I love her so much is because her team is just so accessible. Excluding Merrin, they all don't require Cairo, and they're typically, most of them I think are all on really easy nodes except Mother Talzin herself. So you can get into that team, get them up to gear 12, and not only from a farming perspective are they really cheap, but if you just get Daka to R5, the team really just functions. It's a huge bang for your buck. And one of the things that the Omicron actually does, and it does make a real difference here, I've had it for a little bit now, is it is going to inflict healing immunity on all enemy first 2 turns, and then also reduce their defense and max health. Both of these things separately are already amazing. There's also protection recovery. That's very cool. But the healing immunity mixed with plague. Healing immunity means that you can't heal, and plague means that you can't cleanse. You cleanse plague by being healed, and you cleanse the healing immunity by cleansing. So all that to say, you get locked into plague and healing immunity. You can't cleanse it, you can't heal, and you just die. This does have to land, and it is resistible, so that does have to be kind of factored into things, but regardless, it's a really nasty counter. Mother Talzin does have potency on her leadership, so that's fun. And then defense and max health, this is just really nice. I've had to take down solo Malguses before, and just having this kind of in your back pocket without having to dip into Mace or Nihilus or Mandor or whatever is really stinking nice. I've enjoyed that immensely. So Asajj does come next, really accessible, and is very good. She starts to come back a little bit more in the end game with the assist of Merrin, but even I've had a really good job finding use for even her at gear 12. We beat a Zori team last night with it. It was amazing. Next up is going to be Iden, and this is where the value really starts to kick up. Iden pretty much takes a bunch of really bad Imperial troopers who weren't doing a whole lot of anything, and they don't have to be super high gear, and they can beat Mon Mothma teams super elite. Like a R5 Mon Mothma, as long as they don't have a Datacron, gear 12 Iden will rip her apart. And even once you gear them higher into the relics, they can start taking on higher targets like CLS, and it's just a really, really good value. And one of the things that I like about the leadership is it is all based off of, and I don't even think it's not even in here. Oh no, it is. Whenever an enemy attacks out of turn, Imperial troop allies recover health and protection and gain 10% turn meter. The way that the game has moved over the last couple, maybe even years now, every single team out there has like one character that is just dedicated to assisting. If it's not all of them already, like the Mon Mothma, the Geos, JMK, it's not being JMK. They all have characters constantly assisting out of turn left and right, left and right. So you kind of get that longevity of where this is always going to probably have some place in the meta. There are some people really far in the end game that are using like Iden, range, and death to beat gas. Or I think, yeah, it's Iden, range, and someone to beat gas. It might not be death. But that's really, really impressive, at least in 3v3. And again, she has a lot of value at the very beginning, especially just being accessible at gear 12, to the point where you don't really have to apply Kairos to anyone. Like, you can leave Iden at like gear 7 or something and just take up Death and Storm and everyone else to gear 12. Completely avoid the Kyro problem. Next up is going to be Zam. Again, we're starting to look at the characters that are super accessible and just super good. You can really plan this out well to get the right bounty hunter team with Bosk and Grief and Mando, and then you get to go first, you get to get contract. It can be just super fantastic, amazing. But even if you don't do that, even if you don't have everything clocked super well, even if you don't have Mando, even if you don't have Grief, Zam is still going to add like a blanket 60 to 70 speed to the entire team just by existing. There's like so few teams out there that wouldn't be super thankful to just shove 60 to 70 speed on the entire team. The way that it works, wrong ability. The way that it works is that for every bounty hunter ally, she's going to gain 5% speed, and then she's going to share 20% of her own speed back out. So you do the math, depending on how fast your Zam is, she's going to end up boosting the rest of the team by a huge margin and can let them start to really play in the end game against these squads that are all going to like 400 speed or something like that. I still use the team when Lord Vader is around and Fennec gets called in. When that's not happening, Dash and Admiral Radice and Bam are all still really high targets. I'm not sure if there's anything else out there. Typically, one of those is almost always on the board, so my bounty hunters end up getting dedicated to something. Next up is going to be Qui Jinn. Still love Qui Jinn. Again, starts to really hit the emphasis on, number one, it's super stinking good, and number two, it's just very accessible. I love to use the team on offense. Once you get into a point where everyone has Bad Batch, defensively, it starts to require a huge investment and starts to move a little bit outside of the accessible box, if you will. That being said, the only real character you need to get Qui Jinn off the ground is Jedi Anakin, and the reason why is because Qui Jinn's Omicron adds a stupid amount of offense, 30 times their speed. So if your Jedi Anakin's at like a very, very slow 200 speed, you're still getting a huge amount of offense, like a ginormous, way bigger than he would be able to get anywhere else. And then on top of that, when Qui Jinn dies, you gain 4% of his offense, and it really just coincides super well with Jedi Anakin's kit with Righteous Fury. When someone else dies, he is going to deal 100% more damage. So you start stacking, all right, 400% for Qui Jinn dying, 30 times his speed just for the Omicron, double that if they have foresight. You just start putting all these numbers on, and Jedi Anakin just starts one-shotting entire teams on his AoE. We've even done this in the very recent endgame. I used it against a Tusken team recently that was all decked out with the Datacron. Jedi Anakin just tore him apart. Very much lore accurate, by the way, so that was fun. The team does not need to be expensive. It can be. Once you get into the later game, you can start putting like Mace and Cam, who are really good with it. But even if you don't have Mace and Cam, or like they're off doing other things, hit Fisto, I'm a Gundai, Jedi Guardian, like this team is fully functional. This team is fully functional in the beginning game. I will warn people, don't put Ezra and Old Ben in here. They ruin Jedi Anakin's unique where he gets 100% bonus damage, and that's really what you're riding on for this team to work. So overall, very good, very accessible. Next up is going to be Wampa. So Wampa is not only good, he's even more accessible now more than ever because you can get his shards with the Mark II currency from Heroic Sith Raid as well as the Crate Raid, so you can get him faster. And the biggest pull for Wampa isn't the fact that it might be that he's good or he's accessible, but it's the fact that he is the entire team. Very similar to Qui Jinn, where Qui Jinn just needs one helper to go. Wampa doesn't need anyone. In fact, he really doesn't want anyone. The way that his kit works is that if there are no other active allies, he starts to get these massive bonuses of defense, max health, max protection, offense. Double, by the way, if no one else is there. And that's really where this ends up having a lot of longevity, is even when you get to the very top and people are making boards where you can't Wampa things, that does happen, he ends up just being a Galactic Legend cleaner. As long as he's the only one walking to the arena when there's only one enemy, he has a fair shot at beating Rey, JMK, and C. There might be one other one. I know he fails. No, he fails against Jabba, fails against Lord Vader, fails against JML very awkwardly enough. Oh, definitely fails against SWGOH. So still has a little bit of value in the end game to be able to clean stuff up. But overall, even in the mid or beginning, he's just so stinking good. Not only for when you need to beat decent teams for where you're at, like Grievous or Iden, but also just because you don't need to gear anyone else up. He is such a good bargain deal. So that is Wampa. Next up, and really I guess kind of last, is going to be Treya and Savage. So I put them together because they can be used together. I really like to use them together. Again, it's more endgame. But even if you're not there, separately, they're both amazing. Like Savage can solo stuff off in the very beginning where you're facing a lot of easier teams. But even once you get him to the end, the amount of stuff that this does is just bonkers. This is so much text. Basically, to sum it all up, he gets a stupid amount of defense and health, and then taunts, and you just can't get past him. And he's constantly giving a ton of turn meter to the rest of the team. So again, he can do things on his own, that's great. But if you pair him with Treya, it just starts cutting out all these counters that can gun right for Treya, like troopers or bounty hunters, because he'll take all the hits, and then he starts sharing turn meter, and then next thing you know, the whole Treya team goes, and you're just toast. So, very, very good. And then Treya herself, again, they just did put so much stuff into this. You gain a ton of buffs, like max health and offense, and you start to get a huge amount of bonus protection. One of the reasons why this is so relevant is because we have a lot of characters out there right now who are dealing healing immunity. And not only that, but irresistible and uncleansable, that's not the right word, but like locked healing immunity to the fact that you can't get rid of it. The one thing that doesn't stop though is bonus protection. You can always keep stacking bonus protection even if you have a healing immunity, because you're not technically healing. And this is how Treya is beating Reva, or how she's beating Third Sister in the end game. So again, tons of use all throughout and a whole lot of use at the very end. Such a good bang for your buck. Treya and Savage are both very accessible characters. Again, you only really need to beat Heroic Sith Raid, and the shards are more accessible than ever. I think we did the math, and you can get her in a couple of weeks now, rather than having to wait months and months and months. And then on top of that, neither of them even need Kairos. Just such good value. So overall, they are going to take number 1 and number 2 for, again, being good, being accessible, and then also just being super long lasting. I do want to address a few, and I didn't need to do this, so this is, hopefully everyone's fine with this. But there were a few like beginning game traps that just don't fit the criteria very well. And every person that I've talked to that has applied Akbar's, Leia's, or Chirpra's ends up regretting it later. I know that it's tempting because in the beginning of the game, you do start to eventually accrue Omicrons, and you don't have that many characters to apply them to, so you apply them to a team you're already using. And I get that, but the sentiment that I've gotten from people who've done that is that 6 months later or a year later, they start to get access to characters like Wampa or Treya, and the Omicron they have there is really not doing anything for them, and they would want it on a better character. So if you want to kind of be one of the, I guess, more experienced or seasoned players and not stick an Omicron on a character that is entirely useless when you could have just waited and it would have been fine, but instead you didn't just put an Omicron on them and you took them all the way up to Relic 5 and now people make fun of you. Don't do those ones. Don't do them at all. Those are the only 3, by the way. There isn't a secret 4th one that I did. We're just going to leave it at that. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. And as always, stay awesome.